Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. Today we're going to use Slimline stamp set to make A2 cards. I have 4 different ideas, all made using one single stamp. Very easy to make. It's all about the composition on your card. I'm hoping my tips and ideas will be helpful and you'll try them out for your card making, whether it is using this particular stamp set or another stamp set, maybe a similar one you have in your stash. This is the look at the stamp set I'm using today. In fact, I'm only going to use that long border floral stamp for my projects. This is obviously designed to work for Slimline cards, and that beautiful frame is also designed to work for Slimline. But with a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking, you can adapt these stamps to other card sizes. Now, I do have a tip for you regarding stamping this long image. I plan to cut it out using a coordinating die, and sometimes these long, skinny stamps curve a little bit. So when you go to cut this stamped image out, the die doesn't align perfectly on top. This happens with anything super long and skinny like this image. But there is a way to get the stamp positioned just right, just straight, so that it aligns perfectly with the die. Now, the way I like to do this is I take the die and I position it in my MISTI. I position it cut side down. Next, I use the die as a guide and position my stamp on top of it. This way I can maneuver this stamp a little bit and make sure that it is indeed positioned perfectly straight. Here's a close-up. The die helps the stamp to stay straight. I then go ahead and close the lid of the MISTI and I'm good to go. I just need to remove the die from the stamp. I did all of my stamping off camera. I stamped a bunch of these beautiful floral borders in Memento Tuxedo Black ink onto Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I colored them with my Copic markers. I did not film that part as it is pretty straightforward. The key here is to create several of these borders and play around with the placement. For example, for my first card, I wanted to use the stamp as is, as a border, and I pre-planned this card design with a floral border on an A2 card. So I have a white card base at the bottom and then dark green cardstock at the top for a lot of contrast. And I have a border separating the two areas. So very easy card design. You just add a sentiment on top and your card is good to go. Now let me show you the process of making this card in detail. I used double-sided tape to adhere a panel of Simon Says stamp midnight green cardstock to an A2 white top folding card base. You can use any color cardstock. I find I like to have 2 different colors to separate the areas above and below the floral border, and I really like this dark green cardstock. It's lately one of my favorites. Next, I figured out a border placement. I used the die and taped it over the card base with low-tack tape. Next, you need to open your card base. I'm using a top folding card base here to make it easier to make a partial cut. Bring your card base to your die cutting machine and make the cut. Now, you want to only cut the bottom part off, so you need to place your cutting plate so that it only covers the bottom part of the border. This way, you will have a decorative cut to the top card base flap. You will need to use a wider machine. I'm using Platinum die cutting machine, and it has an 8.5-inch opening. I make the cut in the machine, and here's what it looks like. I have my bottom decorative border cut. Next, I die cut 3 or 4 of these floral borders from plain white cardstock, just blank die cuts. I adhered the pieces together using glue and adhere to the back of the colored piece. So now I have something that almost looks like a chipboard. The idea is to position the die cut over the partial cut, and I can do that using glue. This is Barely Arts glue. I love to use this glue for all of my crafting lately. It is kind of runny glue, but it also has a detailed nozzle, which makes it perfect to quickly squeeze a little bit of glue out of the bottle and apply it precisely where it is needed. I trimmed the excess off, and here's the look at my decorative edge card base. It is a slightly different design, but a very cool and a very fresh one. I do have this leftover piece, and At first, I wasn't planning to use it, but later decided to add it above the main piece to continue that floral border design. I just didn't want to waste this little piece. I wanted to utilize it as well. So here's a look at this card once finished. I added a sentiment using one of Simon's pre-printed sentiment strips. These are fantastic to make a quick sentiment for a card. And I also added a foiled panel on the inside of the card. I had this card panel sitting around on my desk for a very long time, and I felt like it worked really well for this card. The background here was foiled using a skinny strip background plate from Spellbinders and gold foil, and I foiled it on sea glass cardstock from Simon Says TM. I also added a couple of jewels, and that finished my card idea number 1. For my second card idea, I wanted to make a frame, but a frame for a smaller A2 card. I have 3 borders here, and I'm going to use them to make a frame. You can have the flowers on the frame face inside, like so, or outside, like so. Both frame designs are very pretty, and I think they look fantastic. You do have a frame stamp included in this stamp set, but it is designed to work on a Slimline card. Because there's that individual border stamp included, you can use it to make a frame for any card size needed. Here, I'm making a frame for an A2 card, but you can just as easily make a frame for a mini Slimline, for a 5x7 card, a square card, for example, maybe a 5x5 card. So you can make this border work for you for whatever card size you're most comfortable working with. I first stamped a sentiment for this card, and I used one from the XL Greetings 2 stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. And with the sentiment in place, it allowed me to plan the frame placement. I carefully measured each border piece, I trimmed it, and I foam mounted it onto the panel using foam adhesive squares. Very easily done, and I just overlapped the border pieces to make my frame. And I used glue where the pieces overlapped. Now, here's another idea for you. I did not exactly execute this one, but I wanted to share it anyways. You can add the decorative border in an L shape as I have here. I would probably just add that L shape at the top and reverse it. And I think that would look really nice. So just make like a partial frame to your card. That would make a very clean and simple design. Now, I only used 3 pieces, so 3 borders. So my frame wasn't entirely perfect or symmetrical, but it worked for me. If you're making a larger card size, or if you aim for perfection, use 4 border pieces. You can see I fussed around with the top piece quite a lot, but I did make it work for this card idea. Now, I quite like the way it turned out. I wouldn't change a thing. In the end, I added some gems to the flower centers and also around the frame, and that finished this card. So it's a very simple, very modern and elegant design. I had some leftover pieces from cutting the borders when making the second card, so I used them to create a different sort of frame for a third card idea. I first stamped the sentiment in the center of the 3 3/4 inches by 5 inch panel, and I foam mounted that stamped sentiment panel onto an A2 white card base. Next, I used the leftover pieces and framed the sentiment from the top and the bottom. These aren't exactly perfect borders, these are just leftovers, but you can see how well they frame the sentiment and finish off the card. It's a super simple design, but a very pretty and a very easy one to make. And if you don't have any leftovers, you can just stamp one border, cut it in half, use 1/2 for the top of the frame and 1/2 for the bottom of the frame. My last card idea for today features a custom background using these borders. I love to make my own backgrounds, and whenever I find a stamp that works perfectly for that, I can't resist using it for a unique background. I colored several. I think I had 4, and 4 ended up being quite enough to cover the entire card front for an A2 card. I foam mounted each border one by one, starting from the bottom. And of course, I used the leftover pieces. So I overlapped the die cuts quite a bit, and I used the leftover pieces in the next row, so in each row above. And I think that made it look a little bit more continuous, as if I used a solid background stamp. Now, because I used individual die cuts, I was able to pop them up to add dimension to the background, and to me, dimension is everything. I'm not a fan of one-layer cards. I mean, I do love them. I love the clean design of a one-layer project, but I cannot make a card without using at least one layer of foam adhesive to pop things up. When things are foam mounted, it looks better to me. It looks more pleasing to the eye. I finished this card with another Axel Greetings sentiment, and then I added lots of jewels to fill the centers of the flowers and also to the background behind the images. So there you have it, 4 ideas, 4 card compositions using just one single Slimline border stamp on A2 cards. All of these are quite easy to make, and I hope you'll give this idea a go yourself. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.